All right, so today we're going to be learning about insect flight mechanisms. And before we start, we're just going to do a little review on note-taking during a flipped lesson. Right now I want you to take out your biology notebook and a writing utensil. And please put away any distractions that may distract you from the learning during this lesson, like your cell phone, and close any tabs in the internet browser you may have open that was on Facebook or games or any social media and stuff like that. Make sure you're in a quiet space. And for note taking, especially, only write down the important information so you're not trying to write down everything. Make sure if something is confusing or you need to rewind, make sure you pause and rewind, stay on one slide longer than others, and other things like that. And in your notebook, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about a particular concept, you write those in the margin next to that concept so we can come back to it tomorrow, because we're going to go into a little bit more depth with this tomorrow. Okay, so the learning objectives for today. Our objective number 1 is that the student will understand the mechanisms that allow insects to be able to fly. Number 2, the student will be able to explain the difference between direct and indirect flight. And number 3, the student will be able to explain the difference between synchronous and asynchronous flight. And let's dive into those. Okay, so we're going to do a quick review on the classification because right now we are learning about arthropods, and we're going to learn about specific classes and orders in the class Insecta, and we're going to learn about specific insects in this class. So the phylum of a dragonfly is an arthropoda. The class is Insecta, and the order for a dragonfly is Odonata. So the bumblebee will have the same phylum and class because they are all under the same class and phylum, but it's going to have a different order. So we have phylum Arthropoda, class Insecta, and the order for bumblebees is Hymenoptera. So dragonflies are Odonata, and Hymenoptera is a bumblebee. Okay, so there are basically 2 types of flights for insects. Direct and indirect. We're going to start with direct. So this is, most insects actually use indirect flight, but dragonflies, damselflies, and mayflies all use direct flight. It's more primitive than indirect, which means more primitive means that it evolved first. So millions and millions of years ago, the very first types of insects used this flight. Even though primitive does mean older, it doesn't mean worse. This type of flight is actually better and more efficient than indirect flight, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But so with direct flight, there's one power muscle that connects to the wing directly. So the muscle and the wing are connected directly to each other, and the muscle pulls directly on the wing for up and down movement. In dragonflies, there's a set of forewings and a set of hind wings with 4 wings total, and each separate wing has independent control, which means each wing can move by itself without the other ones moving. And that's very important. Okay. So the alternating red and kind of pale things in the middle of the thorax, which we all know is the part of the body on an arthropod in between the head and the abdomen. So that's called the thorax. And these are the muscles that are connected directly to the wing. And you can see that by looking at the pink dots right in the center. So every time those muscles move, the wings move. And that's how it's direct flight, because they're directly attached to that wing base right there. So the next method of flight is called indirect flight, and this is most insects, especially the bumblebee and the fly, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The muscles in that thorax, which is again between the head and the abdomen, contract and deform in order to make the wings go up and down. So in indirect flight, the muscles aren't directly attached to the wing, they attach to the thorax, and when they contract, as muscles do, like go contract and then release, contract and then release, that causes the muscles to, or the wings to move up and down. These muscles are called dorsolongitudinal and dorsoventral. It's like a spring. So picture a spring like on a trampoline, When you press down on it, it takes effort and force to press it down. But when you release your hand, the spring pops back up with no effort to bring it back up. So it's an energy saver. I'll show you that right here. So see these two long pale muscles are the dorsal-longitudinal muscles, and those two orange dots span the length of the thorax, and those are the dorsoventral muscles. When they contract, they pull the thorax down, and that indirectly causes the wings to go up and down. So see how these wings are not directly attached to the muscles, but they're attached to the thorax. So that's why it's called indirect flight. And I'm going to show you a little video just to explain this a little bit more.
A dragonfly muscle. This is a wasp. To see how normal insects operate their wings, we need to cut the thorax.
So a wasp and a dragonfly use the same mechanism to fly. Or a wasp and bumblebee. So he's going to talk about indirect flight. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Their wings, we need to cut the thorax in half so we can see the muscles operating on the inside. Ugh, it's uglier than I thought.
He's pulling on the thorax.
The wings of most flying bugs use this method, which is called indirect musculature. The muscles pull on the body wall of the thorax instead of on the wing itself. The shell then pushes on the wing, which seesaws on a pivot point and moves up and down. The problem is muscles pull, they don't push. So how does the wing return? If you were to imagine that the thorax was shaped like a football, the big muscles would be squishing the ball in on the middle. When you turn it on its side, you can see that this little muscle runs the length of the football and pulls in long ways from the inside.
This is like the spring mechanism I was talking about. That football is the same thing. It's like a spring.
See that they have what's called direct musculature. Their muscles pull directly on the wings and are able to operate each wing independently in both directions. This is a big deal.
Each wing independently, because each wing has its own separate muscle directly attached to it. That's how it gives it independent control.
And this is why they completely dominate the insect flying world. If you look back at the high speed, in those little cracks, you can see muscles wiggling and pulling directly on the wings. That's pretty awesome, huh?
Each wing can move directly by itself in a dragonfly. Okay, so really quickly in your biology notebook, and you're going to turn these in for homework points tomorrow, so make sure you're doing these 2 quick writes. Explain in a picture or short paragraph the three main differences between direct and indirect flight in insects. You may use a picture or a short paragraph. Please write that down now. And pause the video. Okay. All right, once you're done with your quick write, now we're going to talk about 2 mechanisms that relate to wing beat, which is how many times wings flap. So when you think of a bumblebee or a housefly, the wings flap very quickly. Really quickly, just for fun. Flap your wings as fast as you can for 30 seconds. Are you getting tired? Yeah, that is very, very tiring for humans because we operate kind of in the same way as dragonflies do with direct musculature. We have a muscle that controls each arm, okay? So now act like a dragonfly and do 1 powerful wing beat, wing flap, but at a slower pace. That's a little bit easier. You're not as tired, right? So dragonflies operate by a synchronous flight mechanism. And this type of muscle uses this type of muscle contracts once every nerve impulse or action potential. Now we've been talking about neurons and nerve impulses and action potentials. And basically what a nerve impulse is, just for review, is it's when your brain sends a signal to a part in your body for it to be able to do something. So for me to be able to put my hair behind my ear, a nerve impulse was sent down my neurons into my arms to be able to lift my arm up and put that behind my ear. Okay? So there's 1 contraction and 1 wing flap per every 1 nerve impulse. This limits the rate that the muscles can contract. That means that's why they go a little bit slower. That's why they're not flapping as hard as bumblebees and flies. Their wing beat is actually about 30 times per second, and that seems fast, but it will seem very slow when we talk about asynchronous flight in bumblebees. Okay, so asynchronous flight is bumblebees, houseflies, most other insects, and this is one nerve impulse or one brain signal, and then each one of those one brain signals sends multiple contractions of the wing muscles. And remember, the wing muscles are like a spring in the thorax going up and up and down. So you got one nerve impulse and then a bunch of contractions, which means a bunch of wing flaps. That's how they can move their wings so fast. So that means there's no limit to the rate that the muscles can contract. And their wings can beat up to 200 times per second. Again, that's in comparison to the dragonfly in synchronous flight, 30 beats per second versus 200 times per second. It's a huge difference. Okay, so we're going to go to a boxer analogy really quick. Okay, so this is synchronous flight muscles, dragonflies. So look at the boxer, and when he takes a sip of water, that's the same as over here in the neuromuscular junction. It's the same as one nerve impulse. So one sip of water is the same as one nerve impulse, okay? One nerve impulse, one wing flap. One nerve impulse, one wing flap. So it's slower, it's more controlled. They have more control over their movements. Okay, now let's look at asynchronous flight. And again, taking a sip of water is equivalent to one nerve impulse, one brain signal. One nerve impulse, multiple wing flaps. Much faster, less controlled. One nerve impulse, multiple wing flaps. It's like they don't stop. Okay. So this is your second quick write. Again, make sure you're writing these down and turn them in tomorrow for homework points. You're going to explain in a picture or short paragraph the difference between synchronous and asynchronous flight. So pause this video and answer the question. Okay, once you're finished, we're going to be talking about an exit ticket. All right. So this is your closer for today's lesson, but make sure you bring this in tomorrow as well because we're going to be using it for bell work. So in your opinion, write down which method of flight, synchronous or asynchronous, saves an insect more energy and why. And just a quick review. Back to the two types of flight. So direct muscle pulls directly on the wing for an up and down movement, and that uses synchronous flight. So it's one nerve impulse per one flap. So it's slower, more controlled. So this pulls directly on the thorax for contraction and extension, and that indirectly causes the wings to move. And these bumblebees, this is a bumblebee, uses asynchronous flight. So one nerve impulse makes this go multiple times. So imagine this flapping much faster than it is. Okay? All right, so again, in your opinion, write down which method of flight, synchronous or asynchronous, saves an insect more energy and why. So we're looking at which insect saves more energy while flying. You can use examples of dragonflies or bumblebees, but use synchronous and asynchronous flight to answer the question. And make sure you bring that in tomorrow. And I hope you guys learned something today, and I'll see you tomorrow.